As Christine Blasey Ford testified under oath, she'd been terrified to step forward publicly. But today, before a group of 21 senators and much of the nation watching, she told her story.
Brett's assault on me drastically altered my life. For a very long time, I was too afraid and ashamed to tell anyone these details. The details about that night that bring me here today are the ones I will never forget. They have been seared into my memory and have haunted me episodically as an adult.
Of course, the questions and statements she faced weren't even split with full support from the Democrats.
I have found your testimony powerful and credible, and I believe you.
There are millions of victims and survivors out there who've been inspired by your courage.
The prosecutor questioning on behalf of the Republicans, that's Rachel Mitchell from Arizona, however, was not quite so warm.
May I ask, Dr. Ford, how did you get to Washington?
In an airplane.
Okay. I asked that because it's been reported by the press that you would not submit to an interview with the committee because of your fear of flying.
But throughout, Ford was steadfast about one key fact.
With what degree of certainty do you believe Brett Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
And so more than 5 hours in came Brett Kavanaugh's turn to defend himself against the charges with anger and a very different statement than the one publicly released yesterday.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed by vicious and false additional accusations. A good name built up through decades of very hard work and public service at the highest levels of the American government. This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit. The Constitution gives the Senate an important role in the confirmation process, but you have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy.
At the time of this taping, Kavanaugh is still being questioned, but while today's testimony from either side will it be a game changer? Joining me to discuss is someone fresh off her successful closing argument in the prosecution of one of the first Me Too trials in this country, the Bill Cosby case, Kristen Gibbons Feden, who's in town to receive the Victim Rights Law Center Leadership Award. Kristen, it's great to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
People who do what you just did in Pennsylvania have to assess the credibility of witnesses before deciding whether or not you proceed. What's your assessment based on today of Blasey Ford?
You know, it's interesting. Dr. Ford exhibited many characteristics that I see consistently in victims.
Like what?
That vivid emotion, the vivid account, not of every single detail of the assault, but how she felt during those moments, how she felt after the assault. That vivid description, I think, speaks volumes to her credibility.
Am I right that in Pennsylvania the statute of limitations on a crime like she is alleging is 12 years? Am I right about that?
Yes.
If this were within those 12 years, which it's obviously not, would what you heard today suggest to you that charges would have been brought against Brett Kavanaugh? Potentially.
I can tell you for certainty an investigation would have occurred.
You know, just for those of you who missed this, and it's a shame you did, she was asked by Patrick Leahy during her testimony, senator from Vermont, what she remembers most. Listen.
Indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two, and they're having fun at my expense.
The two obviously being, according to her, Brett Kavanaugh, Mark Judge, who is not at this thing. You know, optics matter. One of the things was most talked about before this hearing started was that the Republican senators would not ask questions, which is totally unprecedented. They picked this experienced sex crime prosecutor from Maricopa County, Arizona, Rachel Mitchell, to ask questions. Jeffrey Toobin, who I love from CNN, said it was like Chevy Chase CSI. I mean, what was your sense? It seemed to me this backfired, not only in terms of her performance, but making these 11 men look absurd. What did you think?
You know, this should have been a truth-finding process, and while I don't know the goal or mission behind her questioning, I can tell you that on a truth-finding process regarding a sexual assault, whether it took place or whether it didn't, there should have been a focus on what happened on that night and not when the allegations came forward, who hired the attorneys or who was paying for the polygraph test. Those aren't questions that are relevant to whether or not a sexual assault occurred.
You know, also, we just saw a little piece of Kavanaugh. As I said, Judge Kavanaugh is now being continued to be questioned as we're taping this thing. His statement yesterday was very much like what he did on Fox News the other day. The preliminary statement he submitted basically said, I didn't do it. I'm defending the honor of my family. I want a fair hearing, etc. He really went on the attack here. And, you know, what I thought about was the successful effort in 1991 of Clarence Thomas to go on the attack with the high-tech lynching. That obviously worked. I'm not sure showing anger hours after there's a woman who says she was sexually assaulted, who was not hyperbolic in her criticism of Kavanaugh, the man just described. Does that not turn off the, quote, jury, the American people, when that's the kind of reaction they get?
I think so. I think it definitely turns many people off. And it will remain to be seen as to when he's actually questioned about what happened that night, whether or not he shows that same anger.
What's the impact? I mean, I'm going to ask you in a couple of minutes about, obviously, your case, which all of America was watching. And I have a feeling I know what the answer of what you think both the conviction and the sentencing was on the willingness of women to come forward who have historically not been believed. Does Ford's performance today advance that goal as well?
I absolutely believe so. She was put under public scrutiny. She was dissected by a prosecutor, nevertheless, and she still was able to remain steadfast and give a vivid account of what happened, and to honestly admit when she didn't remember every single detail.
Yeah, but does that gain, as I think we're both describing, does that all dissipate if Brett Kavanaugh gets 51 votes next week and is confirmed to the Supreme Court of the United States? Does it potentially not only eliminate the positive, but create a great negative for those who think that she had the courage to testify and it came to nothing?
I hope not. You know, you don't always get a conviction, whether it's criminal, or you don't always get the result that you want. But it's the bravery of the victim and the survivor coming forward, I think, that should, I hope, keep survivors' hope alive.
You know, most people know, even though we don't know her like you do, Andrea Constand. I want to play a little sound from another brave woman. Kathy McKee is another one who says she was raped by Bill Cosby. Here is her reaction on CNN immediately after the sentencing of Cosby to 3 to 10 years in state prison.
I'm just struggling to keep going every day, and I'm happy that the judge sentenced Bill Cosby accordingly, and I'm grateful to Andrea for standing strong.
You know, Kristen, I hope I got my timing right. The mistrial was pre-Me Too. Am I not right about that?
What do you
mean? Mistrial, the conviction,
yeah.
The original mistrial in the case was pre-Me Too. The conviction was after Weinstein and Me Too.
That's right, that's right.
Am I making too much of a leap to say that being in the environment had some impact on the conviction of Bill Cosby?
You know, every juror was asked whether or not they'd be able to put the Me Too movement aside and fairly and impartially review the evidence as it came in the trial alone. And I believe that the jury did that in this case. I think that the Me Too movement, though, had an impact in terms of allowing the public to watch the trial and gain awareness and allow survivors to have hope that that justice can be served.
You know, the New York Times said that if there were cameras in the courtroom, and by the way, I'm appalled that there are not cameras in the courtroom. In every courtroom in America, don't tell me you're on the other side of that. You don't think there should be cameras in the courtroom?
You know, I have to say it helped my nerves, at least, that there were no cameras in the courtroom.
Well, but 49 states do have them. Okay, we can have that debate some other day. New York Times says if there were cameras in the courtroom, your closing argument, your summation would have gone viral. For people who, I was going to say for people who didn't see it, which is everybody, tell us, what was the thrust of what you had to say to the jury?
The main thrust that I had to say to the jury was, one, that Andrea Constand was not the con artist. It was Bill Cosby who was the con artist. He was the one that was gaining the confidence and the trust of these women and sexually assaulting them. The
defense lawyers did call her a con artist.
That's right.
You're responding to them.
That's right.
Okay.
It was not only that response in regard to Andrea Constand, but those 5 other brave women in the first trial who came forward, put their lives under a microscope, got cross-examined. I had to make sure that they were defended as well, because the defense attorneys assassinated their characters as if they were the ones on trial and not the defendant.
Is it true that you rewrote part of your summation after hearing the summation of the defense? I mean, that's what I read. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Because of your rage about what you just described?
Absolutely.
Andrea Constant, from what I read, only spoke for, a couple of minutes, and she submitted a statement. Is that right?
That's right.
Why did she choose to speak as briefly as she did after this long journey? Why was that decision made? On the sentencing, I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I don't know, but I can tell you that she spent a lot of time and effort making sure that her thoughts were thoroughly put in that victim impact statement. And she felt that that was enough and that the court had that.
By the way, everybody I assume has seen, there's a beautiful photograph, and I knew there'd be a smile on your face, of you and Constant. We'll just put it up on the screen. It's really, were you nervous when you're doing, I'm saying to myself, I thought you were going to downplay it. You're not. You are making a summation, and I think what most people would agree is, so far, the single most important case of sexual assault, violent sexual assault, in the Me Too era. Did you feel like it wasn't just this case, but you were carrying the weight of, thousands, if not millions of women? No, I'm serious about that, by the way. Did you not feel that pressure?
There was a lot of pressure. The courtroom was packed. But I got to tell you, honestly, the pressure was trying to make sure that I was doing everything I could to obtain that conviction for Andrea Constant.
How do you manage, John Kerry was sitting here last night, and I said, how do you deal with disappointment, Secretary Kerry? How do you deal with, when you're in that kind of high-profile setting, how do you deal with the anxiety, the nervousness, the thought, I said, oh my God, what if they acquit this guy? How do you deal with that?
It's tough, but to deal with it, you have to know where your heart is. And your heart is trying to do the right thing. It's not always going to be, you're not always going to get the result you want, but if you keep fighting, eventually you're going to send a message.
What did Constant say to you after the verdict?
Well, I asked her if she was happy with the sentence, and she said yes. Yeah, the 3 to 10, and she said yes. She was.
Did she have, essentially, I don't want to say talked her into proceeding. You went up to Toronto to basically convince her that she had a shot here. What kind of anxiety did she feel through this process that might come to nothing? There was a mistrial. Who knows what's going to happen the second time? Was she worried about that essentially a jury wouldn't believe her?
Sure, and actually when I went up to Canada the initial time, I asked her, was it okay if we could reopen the investigation? So there was even more anxiety behind it because I hadn't guaranteed her, I couldn't, that we were even going to press charges. So it was solely, can we open this case? Would you be willing to cooperate should we decide to press charges?
Okay, so let me ask you the same thing I asked you about Kristen Blasey Ford, where we don't know the outcome. We know about her testimony. We do know the outcome in the Cosby case. We all saw the visual of him being let off in handcuffs after the sentencing. What's the impact of that? Is that a tipping point in this whole thing in America?
I think so.
Why do you think that?
Because when you're able to show your courage and show your conviction and remain steadfast and brave regardless of the costs, I think it sends a message.
I think you did pretty good on the courage and conviction front too, Kristen. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me.
I think America feels that way. Thank you so much for being here.